Uh, Greetings. Just a little bit of RPG chat this afternoon. I've said several times in different videos in the channel. I'm running currently uh, my own RPG with 8 people, so it's a heavy game. There's a lot of players, and so one thing that I can struggle with, and I think other GMs also struggle with in general, is that combats can indeed last quite a bit. They can drag on. They can, a combat of an hour is certainly a reasonable time. You can go 2 hours or three, right? It can be a long, long fight. Some of them. Now, sometimes that's okay for set pieces and stuff, but I mean, a general fight that just happens out of sort of a natural encounter that you have, say, a random encounter in the wilderness, because we have that in the game too. We have like that exploration element, and you might just draw, oh, hey, hey, you meet up with some angry goblins or gigantic carnivorous cattle, so just whatever. um, and so keeping fights short and succinct and sweet is sort of important to the flow. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to start with my dumb Beetle story. So this was years ago. I was running. It was a game in like a Bronze Age world, which doesn't really matter, but similar rule set. And I think it was the group, and it was I don't know how many people were playing at the time, maybe six, and it was against six of these large beetles. Now, big, nasty, giant beetles, and the beetles were fairly tanky. And if you just hit them in the side or whatever, then you'd have a hard time. If you hit them in the big old shell carapace, right, you would have a very hard time. If you got them flipped over, or if you hit them in the eyes or the antenna, then you could actually do some damage to them. So they were pretty tanky and pretty difficult. But it was pretty fun because through a reasonably cool and wacky set of rolls, the group just cut through 4 of these things like in a couple rounds. It was pretty impressive, right? The spearman hits him in the eye. Someone goes and flips one over, and then right, the big dude with the hammer smashes down. Like they are cutting through these things just amazingly so. And that was like round 2 or 3. Their luck sort of ran out, and then they couldn't get a roll to save their lives. And what was a 20-minute, very engaging fight that the players loved became like an hour and a half, right, where the players could, I mean, it wasn't that long, but it was a long slog that the players could not get damage through in these stupid-ass beetles. And it just dragged, and it sucked. It went from awesome to sucking fairly quickly. And that's what we want to avoid, right? And so really and you would go, okay, so what does that mean, right? And the battle wasn't hard for the PCs, and it was never in doubt after that first couple rounds. And it wasn't that this battle was incorrectly tuned; it was actually the correct balance for the Beatles did some damage, blah blah blah, and so on, right? It was the correct balance. It just well, sort of the correct balance. So they were obviously a little too tanky in general. So anyway, but it worked out until I did not until I let the battle continue. And so what my message here today is, let battles end, and I'm going to put when they are over, when they are done, over. And that sounds like a weird phrase, right? Let these battles end when they're over. And they might be over before they're done. um, right? Or let's say not when they're complete. How's that? let the battles end when they're over and not necessarily when they are complete. I think I like that as a rule of thumb. And what does that mean? So I think the point being that so every game, every war game, every tactical minis game, every miniatures, like every game with a battle system that matters, that lasts more than has multiple actions and rounds and so on. Every, let's call it rules heavy game, has something called, I want to call it the pace of decision, or maybe we should call it the point of decision, right? Pace of decision. Let's put point. Pace or point of decision. I use way too many slashes nowadays and ellipsis in my life. And what that means is that there is a point in a battle or in a war game scenario or whatever where the game is decided, but it might take another X turns for it to be done. In the case of my Beetles, the first 2 or 3 rounds decided the fight. There's no way those 2 Beetles were winning the fight or causing the PCs to retreat or actually posing a real threat. It was simply the fight was decided, but it wasn't over. And as I put here, so what that means is the battle's over, but it ain't done. And that's what happened in the Beetle fight. And again, this can lead to the battle dragging. It drained the fun out of that fight. It truly drained the fun. And worse, so let me put this. I'll even put these. I have my little stupid notes here. So what does that mean? It meant the battle drained the fun out of what was a snappy fight. Like it was bam, and we were in and done. And like I said, at that point, everybody was actually pretty happy with how it went. But then the other 6 rounds dragged. There was no fun anymore. And I think 1 or 2 characters actually got wounded because, you give the Beetles enough rolls and they're going to hit somebody and do enough damage. And it sort of sucked because it felt very anticlimactic, right? Because it's one thing. So I think it's one thing for your character to be in the midst of a heated, pitched battle that matters, and you get wounded or you get killed. It's another thing if you're just mopping up 2 freaking Beetles, and you're nickel and diming them to death, and sort of dinking through 60 hit points or some garbage. And you just can't bring them down. And then one of them happens to gut you. And now you're impaired or some such for the rest of the adventure, or you're down hit points, or you have to use a healing potion or whatever. And that sucks. And so that was a bad DMing for me. And it was a bad decision. So my point is very simple, and I think a lot of folks, even now, still have sort of that mentality of, well, there are 6 goblins in this room. We're fighting until all 6 of those goblins go down, or right, we're fighting till the end because it's somehow baked into the DNA of some of these games that we are going to, fight to the last man. And the funny part is, it actually isn't really, I shouldn't say baked into the DNA, because actually a lot of early versions of D&D had morale, right? Like once you cut someone down to say half strength or whatever, or a leader went down, then you would have to check to see if those monsters were going to stick around or if they were going to turn tail and run. And I think that's one good way to sort of manage it is, the next time you're going to have that fight, the next time you set up that encounter, jot down in the encounter, like, what are the conditions that these guys would take off, would be done? What makes them run? These bandits are here. They're not fanatical. if the leader goes down or they lose two guys, they're out. You know, hell, even each guy, like so if you have a game now D&D isn't like this, because D&D, you are 100% fighting capability until you reach 0 hit points, and then you were zero, so it's very binary. But in Runeberry, you might be bleeding and winded and impaired, right? You can so easily not be in good fighting shape. You take two impairments and you're like, well, I'm -2 to everything. All right, this really starting to suck. Maybe I should be gone, right? And so each guy even could have, hey, if he takes a wound, he's out. He's getting out of dodge. And then if two guys or three guys get out of leave, then everyone will turn tail. So think of that, like when will they run, right? And sort of make that determination. When will your guys take off, turn tail, and run? Get them out of there. Um, and I think that's a good way to cut the fight short, because now it's not 100% of the battle; it is 50%. Um, you only have to cut through half the guys, or kill the leader, or whatever, right? Another good way, I think, to sort of mix it up and make sure that we're not always fighting to the death, having alternate goals for the fight. So, as a for instance, what if the goblins aren't, they're going to attack the village, but they don't need to kill everyone in the village. All they need to do is set fire to the main house, or kidnap one dude, or steal the wine, or whatever. What you know what I mean? Some other goal. Like if there's another goal for the villain, or another goal for the PCs, other than kill everyone at the table, then once you reach that goal, hey, the scenario's over. Like you've won this fight, or you've lost this fight. 20 goblins in your fight. You have 6 guys. You're fighting 20 goblins, and they, using their flaming arrows, set fire to the witch's hut, and then take off. Boom. Alternate goal. The fight's over quicker, and it also sort of mixes up their tactics a little bit, because they're not just fighting to gun down the players, and the PCs don't necessarily always. They're not just fighting to gun down the goblins. They are fighting to stop them from reaching their goal, which could bring a lot of different maneuvers and tactics and so on to the fight. But since we're talking very specifically about shortening the fights, it will also shorten them, because those goals are not always, hey, kill everybody in, on the table, right? Um, and for and so I do this a lot in superhero games, the escape, I do it in fantasy games as well now, and that's just to at some point go, okay, you've done it. These guys are taking off, right? So once they hit their morale cap here, or they reach their alternate goal, they're going to escape. And the question then becomes, how do they escape, right? And this could be as simple as, frankly, you just saying they turn tail and run, but we will get to that in a minute. Or it could be a thing. It could be like the super villains in the superhero game. They use their fireball to nuke the oil tanker that happens to be there, or they use their laser vision to weaken the supports of the water tower, or they put some civilians in peril. And fantasy villains can do this too, frankly. They cast Cloud Kill, but not toward the PCs. They cast it toward the spectating villagers who are nearby, watching the grand spectacle of the epic combatants, right? And now, don't get me wrong. Some groups will go for this, and some groups will be like, yeah, I'm killing that guy no matter what. Like, I'm going to chase him down. And I think at that point you need to, that's part of the agreement at the table, sort of how do we want to play this out. So sometimes I will simply, and this goes with this one too. Here, hold on. And so I might do one of two things here. I might say, look, these guys are going to run. And someone say, oh, I get a parting shot or whatever. And I go, oh, sure. Right. Or you just say, nah, I mean, right. Or you let them mop up. Like, so some fights will be like, so, so I feel like the escape's more important if the villain is important to you in some fashion. And if you do have a villain that is important to your plot and you want them to escape, you better darn well plan for that escape somehow. They need a teleport, they need some kind of phase, they need the ability to put someone in peril, they need mooks to tie up the players for a round, summons, obscure vision, like they need something, right? Now in superhero games, it's easy. Everybody has a shtick, everybody has a power. Secret doors that weren't there before, right? The villain's backed up against the wall and he puts his hands up and happens to tap a brick and the wall goes whoop, and flips around. Stuff like that. You need to plan for that escape. Against putzes, sometimes they just go, yeah, they run. Now, the other way to do it is to just do the mop up, which is, hey, guys, look, I think you've won this. We're not going to spend the next 3 rounds mopping up. You win. Now, you should be ready for sort of the idea that they're going to want to either, oh, we want to make sure everybody's dead, or we want to capture someone for information, right? Like that whole sort of thing. If you're so this is a place where it's good to talk with folks about how they feel about not playing out the rest of the fight. Now, some of this comes down to the game system you're playing. If you play a game system where, the more monsters you kill, the more experience you get, or the more money you get, and that ties to experience, it's sometimes harder to say, hey, everybody runs away, because that sort of feels like you're taking something away from them. You also need to be careful in scenarios where you go, well, I arbitrarily let the bandits run away, so they warned the rest of the bandits, because that also seems a little cheap. So the idea here is, talk to your players, don't be cheap, understand what you're potentially taking away from them by sort of arbitrarily ending the fight. What you're giving them back is minutes in their lives. like, so in some case you might go, hey, I would like to end this and I want the bandits to run. Is that okay? And they'll go, yeah, sure. Or no. We're gonna try to cut these guys down or cut them off. And then you might have to decide whether that's a thing. And you might say, okay, well, let's make a roll, or okay, we'll just play out the next round, or right? How about these 2 bandits can't run because they're too close, but I'll give that one, I'll give your archers a shot at that, right? Or something. And sometimes they might just come up with something and you go, okay, these guys can't escape. Like, oh, the monk runs at 9 hexes around as opposed to 6. He's going to catch up to that guy. That guy's dead. And in that case, I would probably just say, well, let's just mop up then. You guys win. You have captured or killed all the enemies and done. And then that, feels better to them. But sometimes I'll just go, hey, they take off. The thugs take off. And most of the times the PCs are like, okay, because they, again, they know they're not going to get unduly punished for letting dudes escape. And none of my games, I'm like, fighting might get you money, but there's no experience benefit to necessarily wiping out everybody at the fight. So I rambled quite a bit there at the end of that. I apologize. But just keep in mind, just end it. But be aware that sometimes the players are going to be like, I'm not sure about that. What happens if these guys take off and then go start the self-destruct sequence or whatever it is they're trying to stop? And so the other thing to keep in mind real quick is, again, this is not for every fight. The cultists might be fanatics. They might fight to the last man. The undead are going to be like, if you do this often, the fact that the undead never do this and you never mop up and they fight to the last, hand is severed and it's crawling to them and they have to smash the hand, like that adds a texture to those fights, which doesn't exist anymore. Like they're now the players are a little bit creeped out because whereas the bandits run and the wild animals, as soon as you get a good lick in, they scatter. But these undead just keep coming at them until they are ground into dust. Now makes these fights a little more pertinent and dangerous, and it's almost like you've given the undead a special ability. They are tireless and fearless now, unlike the rest of your creatures. And now they're different. Also, it's not for every fight because, like I said, sometimes we talked about this above in the escape and the mop up. Sometimes the players just don't feel they can allow anyone to escape or can allow, I mean, and again, in that case, you have to sort of listen to them. And they're like, look, we think these guys are going to go tell their evil master if we let them go. We can't let them go. So in that case, you might say, you're right. We can't do that this fight. Go ahead and roll initiative or whatever. But if even if that's the case, you can play out the escape probably in a couple rolls faster than you can play out them killing everybody, right? You don't have to still grind that out. You might be able to, in a few quick moves, determine, hey, that guy's going to get away or that guy's not going to get away. And again, you've shortened the fight by 3 rounds or half an hour or whatever. So that's sort of my mini GM advice, which is let the battles end early when they're over, not necessarily when they are complete. And that's it. So I will talk to you all later. Thanks for listening to my rambling, and I'll see you tomorrow. I don't know when I'll see you. I have no idea. I don't know when I'm publishing this or if. I just don't know. I'll talk to you later. Bye.